Welcome back to the deep dive. I want to start today by asking you to visualize something.
Okay, I'm ready.
I want you to picture a library, but not one of these modern glass-walled university libraries. Picture a personal private library somewhere in the Middle East, maybe Iraq, let's say mid-20th century.
I can smell it already. That old paper smell.
Exactly. High ceilings, maybe the smell of dust and old leather, and maybe some cardamom from tea that was just brewed, and the shelves are just groaning under the weight of these old leather-bound books.
Okay, I'm there. It's quiet, contemplative. The air feels heavy, but in a good way. Thick with history.
Right. And on a desk in the middle of this room, there is a book, and it's a very standard, very respected religious text. It's titled Al-Fiqh ala al-Madahib al-Khamsa.
Which translates to Jurisprudence according to the 5 schools.
And just that title alone tells you something.
Oh, absolutely. Just to pause you there. That is a massive title in the Islamic world. It's not some fringe pamphlet. That is a heavyweight book. It's a foundational attempt to bring different legal systems together. A really important project.
Right. But today, we aren't actually looking at that book. I mean, we are, but we're not. We are looking at the margins.
The margins.
We are looking at a specific copy of this book where another scholar, a philosopher really, a man named Abdul Jabbar Al-Waeli, has taken a pen and has absolutely unleashed chaos in the white space.
I love this. So it's not just a few notes.
No, he hasn't just written notes. He has written a counterbook inside the original book. It's a commentary so extensive it's almost a hostile takeover of the page.
It's a textual invasion. He's graffitiing on a masterpiece, but with, scholarly arguments.
It really is. We are effectively opening a time capsule today. The source material, Al-Waili's commentary, is called Al-Taaqib, which just means the commentary. And inside this time capsule is a furious, high-stakes argument between two eras, between two worldviews, happening right there on the page.
It is such a fascinating visual, isn't it? You have the printed text, that's Magnia's work, it's the official religion, sitting there in neat black ink, solid, unchanging, permanent.
Establishment view.
The establishment view. And then all around it, weaving through the borders, up the sides, sometimes crammed at the bottom, you have this handwriting, this is Al-Waily, scribbling away, challenging everything, questioning, pushing back.
And when we say challenging everything, we mean everything. This isn't a small debate about a minor point of grammar. We're talking about the nature of God's law versus the reality of the atom bomb.
That is the scale we're operating on. It's not small stuff.
So here is the mission for this deep dive. We have two main characters. First, we have Muhammad Jawad Magnia, the original author. His project is unity. He's trying to get the major Muslim sects, Sunni and Shia, to see how much they have in common. He's the diplomat. He's building bridges.
A noble, a very difficult project.
And then we have our second character, Abdul Jabbar Al-Waeli, the commentator. He looks at Magnia's beautiful bridge and basically says, this is a great bridge, but it leads to an abandoned city.
Right. He thinks the sects are missing the point entirely because while they are arguing about, say, the minutiae of prayer rituals, the rest of the world is inventing television, splitting the atom, and discovering microbes.
Al-Waily is essentially shouting from the margins, the house is on fire, and you're all arguing about the drapes.
That's a perfect way to put it. The whole paradigm has shifted, and he feels like he's the only one who's noticed.
Exactly. So today we are going to explore a very radical, very modern claim. And that claim is that science specifically, 1950s science, with its microscopes, its chemistry, its new understanding of the universe, should actually override religious texts if there is a conflict.
Which is a concept that just stops people in their tracks. Because usually, in any religious tradition, the text is the anchor. The text is the final word. It's the unmovable object.
Right.
Al-Waily comes along and just flips the entire board over.
Mm-hmm.
He says reason, or aql, as it's called in Arabic, that's the anchor. And science is the best tool reason has.
So buckle up. We are going to get into the weeds. We are going to talk about dead rats in water tanks. We are going to talk about the theological implications of veterinary science.
We are going to talk about whether clean pigs could ever be considered halal. I mean, he goes there.
He absolutely does. And through it all, we are going to ask the big question. If you update your religion to fit modern science, is it still religion? Or have you just turned it into the Department of Public Health?
That is the question, isn't it? Where is that line? Let's dive in.
So before we get to the rebel Al-Waily, we really have to respect the canvas he was painting on. We need to talk about Muhammad Jawad Magnia and this book, The 5 Schools. Why does a book like this even exist? Because Honestly, writing a book trying to synthesize 5 different complex legal schools sounds like an absolute nightmare to organize.
It is an organizational nightmare. But to understand Magnia, you have to understand the pressure cooker of the mid-20th century Middle East. This isn't just an academic exercise for him. It's deeply political.
What's the context here? What's happening in the world?
You have the end of the formal colonial era. The British and French are, on paper, pulling back, but their influence is absolutely still there, pulling strings behind the scenes. You have the rise of Arab nationalism, pan-Arabism. You have the creation of the State of Israel, which sent shockwaves through the entire region.
A lot of turmoil.
A tremendous amount of turmoil. And there's this deep, deep anxiety running through the intellectual class that the Muslim world is weak, and it's falling further and further behind the West.
Weak in what sense? Military? Economic? Or something else?
All of the above, military, economic, technological. But Magnia, looking at this whole landscape, he diagnoses a specific sickness at the core of it all. Division, more specifically sectarianism.
The Sunni Shia split.
Primarily, he sees this split not just as, an old theological disagreement from centuries ago. He sees it as a live, active, geopolitical vulnerability, a weakness that is being exploited in the present day.
It's the classic divide and conquer strategy.
Precisely. And Magnia explicitly writes about this in his introduction. He doesn't mince words. He says the enemies of Islam. And he's pointing his fingers directly at the imperial powers. They love this stuff. They exploit these rifts to dominate the East.
So his thinking is, if the Jafaris and the Hanafis are busy fighting each other over whether you should fold your arms during prayer or pray with them at your sides,
they won't notice the empire setting up military bases or, extracting all the oil. Internal conflict keeps you distracted from the external threat.
So his book wasn't just a legal manual. It was a political weapon, a shield.
It was a political project disguised as a legal manual. That's the key. His driving goal was unity. He wanted to compile the legal rulings of the 5 major schools, the Jafari, which is the primary Shia school, and the 4 major Sunni schools, Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi'i, and Hanbali, all in one volume, side by side.
I want to pause on the sheer difficulty of that for a second, because usually these legal traditions are incredibly insular. You study your school, you don't mix them. Hanafi judge looks at Hanafi books. A Maliki judge looks at Maliki books. Mixing them is almost taboo in some conservative circles. It's seen as undisciplined.
Right. It's like trying to write a single rule book for, the NFL, rugby union, rugby league, and Australian rules football. To an outsider, they look vaguely similar. But if you're a player, the details are fierce, and they are everything.
See, what was Magnia's method? How did he do it?
He had a very clever and simple approach. He took a topic, say, the rules of ablution, and he would state the consensus first. He'd say, all 5 schools agree that you must wash your face. That's the easy part. He wanted to show right off the bat, look, we agree on 90% of the rules.
Building common ground.
Building common ground. Then, for the 10% where they disagreed, he used a very calm, academic, almost detached tone. He just lists the views. He'd say, regarding wiping the feet, the Hanafis say X, while the Jafaris say Y. No judgment, no saying these guys are heretics or this view is weak, just data.
He wanted to lower the temperature, to show that a difference of opinion is natural, it's part of the tradition, and it's not a cause for war.
Exactly. He's trying to remove the fanaticism, is a word he uses. He says this complexity, this maze of different rulings, it keeps the common person ignorant and dependent on their local sectarian leader who might be manipulating them for political ends.
So if the law is a maze, you need a guide, and that guide has power over you.
But if the law is simple, if it's laid out clearly on a page, you can walk the path yourself. You're empowered. His book is an act of intellectual liberation for the common person.
So Magnia builds this house. It's sturdy, it's respectful, it's politically savvy, a beautiful, unified house where everyone can live together. And then Abdul Jabbar Al-Waeli walks in the front door.
He takes one look at the plumbing and the wiring.
And says, this is all garbage. This whole structure is a fire trap. We need to rip the pipes out and start over.
That is a pretty accurate way to put it. He respects the intention, but he thinks the foundation is rotten.
Okay, let's introduce our disruptor, who is Abdul Jabbar Al-Waeli. Because he's not just some random heckler. This is a very scholarly, very dense commentary. He's clearly well-read. He knows the tradition he's critiquing.
He is a scholar, but he's a distinct type of scholar, and that's crucial. In the introduction to his commentary, the Tamhid, he sets a tone that is it's very specific to his time. He's very clear about how he sees himself.
He doesn't call himself a faqih, a traditional jurist.
No, he avoids that title. He describes himself as a thinker, a mufakir, reading with a logic of science and religion combined, not one or the other, both together.
The logic of science. And reading his intro, I was so struck by his obsession with the word modern. But it's not our version of modern with the internet and AI. He has this very specific, almost retrofuturist definition from the 1950s.
Oh, I love his list. You have to share his list. How does he define the modern era?
He calls it the age of speed, the atom, cinema, and television.
It's so evocative. The atom. That's the key. You have to remember, in this era, the atom wasn't just a particle you learned about in chemistry class. It was a symbol. It was
Right.
ultimate power. It was the atomic bomb. It was nuclear energy. It was the future.
And most importantly, it represented a reality that you couldn't see with your eyes, but which controlled the entire world.
And that's his wedge, isn't it? The invisible reality. That's the crack he uses to break open the whole system. Al-Waili's main argument, the thread that runs through his entire commentary, is that traditional jurisprudence, all the stuff Magni is so carefully organizing, is frozen in time. It's a beautiful photograph of the 7th century, but the world is no longer in the 7th century.
What makes it frozen, in his view?
It's because the ancient jurists, for all their brilliance, based their laws on what they could observe with their own senses. Naked eye observation. If water looked clean and smelled clean, it was clean. If a dog looked scary and ate garbage, it was a monster. They didn't have microscopes. They didn't know about bacteria or germs or viruses.
So Al-Waily is looking at Magnia's beautifully organized book and saying, this is great, but you're just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. You're organizing a set of rules that were written by people who didn't know germs existed.
Correct. And he believes that if you don't update the software of religion to account for germs, atoms, and cinema, the whole system will crash. He's deeply concerned that the old way is making religion look stupid, look superstitious in front of the educated youth of his generation.
He's worried about irrelevance.
He's terrified of it. He has this catchphrase he repeats in various forms. There is no religion for one who has no reason. La din liman la akola.
There's no religion for one who has no reason. That sounds great on a bumper sticker, but in a religious context, those are fighting words.
They really are.
Usually, religion is about faith, sometimes in spite of reason. The traditional line is, trust the text, even if you don't understand it. God knows best.
Al-Waily rejects that dichotomy entirely. He argues that it's a false choice. He says God gave us the brain. God created the laws of physics and biology. So if the brain, using science, discovers a fact like this clear water is full of cholera bacteria, and the religious text seems to say, no, the water is magically pure because there's a lot of it, then the interpretation of the text must be wrong.
Because God wouldn't lie to our brains. God wouldn't create a universe where his book contradicts his world.
That's the core of his philosophy. The contradiction is in our understanding, not in God's creation.
So he proposes a solution to fix this, a term that we hear a lot in Islamic studies, ijtihad.
Yes, ijtihad, the big one.
We need to unpack this, because often people translate this as just struggle or effort, but in a legal sense, it's much more specific than that.
In this context, ijtihad means independent reasoning. It is the intellectual license for a qualified scholar to look at the primary sources, the Quran and the Sunnah, and derive a new ruling for a new situation that wasn't explicitly covered before.
It's the engine of legal innovation.
It was, yes. But there's a catch in Sunni history, a very famous one, right? The gate.
The closing of the gate of each ijtihad.
Right. There's a historical narrative, and it's debated by academics how absolute this was, but the sentiment is very real, that around the 10th or 11th century, the major Sunni scholars decided that the gate of ijtihad was closed.
What was the logic there?
The idea was basically, look, the great masters, Abu Hanifa, Shafi, Malik, Ibn Hanbal, they figured it all out. They did the heavy lifting. They established the methodologies. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. From now on, our job is just to follow their precedents, to be good imitators, we'll call it.
It's like saying, we've written the Constitution, we've had the Supreme Court rulings, the system is set, nobody touch anything for the next 1,000 years.
Exactly. And you can see the appeal. It provides stability. It prevents chaos. It creates a predictable legal system. But Al-Waily says it provides death. He argues it leads to stagnation, to intellectual decay.
He wants to kick that door down.
He wants to blow it off its hinges. He argues that closing the gate turns religion into a fossil, a museum piece. He wants a living, breathing law that can react to the age of the atom. He's basically shouting, why are we listening to a 10th century scholar about water purity when he didn't know what a microbe was?
Okay, so that's the philosophy. But philosophy is one thing. The rubber really meets the road. or I guess the ink meets the margin, when he starts applying this to specific rules. And the first battlefield he chooses is water.
Water. It sounds so mundane, doesn't it?
Okay.
But in Islamic law, water is everything. It's the foundation of ritual practice. You cannot pray if you are not ritually pure. You cannot become pure without water. So defining what water is matters immensely.
It's the entry point to worship.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
And Magniya's text, representing the traditional view, has a very specific, very mathematical, volume-based definition of purity. Right?
Yeah.
So let's get technical for a second, just to show the listener what Al-Waily was up against. Classical fiqh is obsessed with volume. There are these two main terms you'll see popping up all over the text, cur and qualitain.
It sounds like something out of a fantasy novel. What is a cur?
A cur is a unit of volume that's used largely in the Jafari, the Shia school of law. It's roughly equivalent to 1,200 Iraqi razats. Now, translating that to modern measurements is tricky, but the general consensus is it's somewhere around 380 liters, which is about 100 gallons.
Okay, so picture a very large bathtub, or a small cistern, a water tank.
That's the right image. And qualitain.
That's the term used more in the Shafi'i school. It literally means 2 large jugs, but as a legal measurement, it's about 500 Iraqi rattles. So it's smaller than a cur, but the underlying principle exactly the same. And the principle is size matters.
Size is protection. The rule, stated simply, is this. If you have a body of water that reaches the volume of a cur, that 100-gallon market, it becomes immune to impurity.
Immune, like it has a force field.
That is effectively the legal concept. Here's how it works. If you have a small cup of water and a single drop of blood, which is considered ritually impure, or najis falls in it, that whole cup is now najis. You can't use it for ablution. It's contaminated.
Makes sense.
But if you have your cur, that 100-gallon tank, and a drop of blood falls into it, the water's fine. It's still pure. The volume of the water is considered strong enough to ward off or overwhelm the small amount of impurity.
Okay, but there must be a limit. What if a whole bucket of blood falls in?
That's the unless. The water remains pure unless one of the 3 signs changes. Its color, its taste, or its smell.
So if the blood actually turns the water red, then it's impure.
And it's impure. But if the water still looks clear, smells clear, and tastes clear, it is legally considered pure, even if you stood there and watched the filth fall into it.
Okay, so let me paint a scenario for you based on the classical texts. I'm a 7th century villager. I have a cistern in my courtyard that holds, let's say, 120 gallons. It's a cur.
Okay.
A rat falls into it overnight and drowns. It sinks to the bottom. In the morning, I come out, I look in. The water volume is a cur. The water looks clear. Can I use that water to wash my face for prayer?
Under the traditional rulings of many of the schools, Magniya outlines.
Yes.
Absolutely. Because the volume is sufficient and the sensory tests, the 3 signs have passed, the self-defense of the water volume has held up, the text says it is tahir, it is pure.
And this is the exact point where Abdul Jabbar Al-Waeli just loses his mind in the margins.
Laughing. He absolutely screams at the text here, metaphorically, of course. He's writing in all caps, literally speaking. He writes in the margins, microbes, bacteria.
He brings in the science of the invisible.
He introduces the concept of Gerathim germs. He says, look, this rule about cur made perfect sense when all we had were our eyes and our noses. It was a good rule of thumb. But now, he says, we have microscopes. We know better.
He argues that water can be crystal clear, completely odorless, and have no taste at all, and yet be absolutely lethal.
Exactly. He brings up diseases like cholera, typhoid, dysentery. None of these things change the taste or color of the water until it's way, way too late. Al-Waily argues that relying on the 3 signs in the 20th century is not just outdated, it is actively dangerous. It's a recipe for an epidemic.
That's a heavy accusation. He's saying that following the religious rule, as written, could kill you.
He is. And he then deconstructs the original rule. He says that the cur and qualitain measurements weren't some kind of divine magic numbers sent from heaven that sanctify water. They were just practical, rough estimates made by the prophet or the early imams to keep people safe in a desert environment where water is scarce.
He's historicizing the rule. He's saying the prophet gave a safety guideline for the year 700 AD. He didn't give a universal chemistry formula for 1950.
Precisely. He argues that the volume was just a proxy for safety. A large body of water is less likely to be dangerously contaminated by a small impurity than a small cup of water. It's about dilution. But now that we can measure contamination directly with science, why are we still using the ancient proxy?
It's like using a sundial when you have a digital watch.
A perfect analogy. So Al-Waily proposes a new definition for pure water. He calls it absolute water.
And what is his definition? It's not about volume, so what is it?
It's a lab report. It's simple. Water is pure if it is chemically H2O and free of harmful pathogens. That's it.
That's the entire definition.
That's it. It doesn't matter if it's a swimming pool or a thimbleful. If it's sterile, it's pure. If it have cholera bacteria in it, it's impure, even if it's an entire ocean.
He's completely dismantling the ritual hierarchy. In the old system, volume granted a special status of purity. In his system, sterility is the only thing that grants purity.
He shifts the authority from the jurist to the chemist, and he extends this logic to everything. Take the issue of tanning animal skins.
This is the part about making leather, right? Another big topic in fiqh.
A huge topic. There is a massive, and I mean massive, debate in classical jurisprudence about which animal skins can be purified through tanning and used. Can you use the skin of a predator, like a lion? Can you use the skin of a sheep that died of natural causes and wasn't slaughtered correctly? The debates are endless and incredibly detailed.
And Al-Waily just cuts through all of it.
Like a hot knife through butter.
Yeah.
He asks the fundamental question: what is the problem with a dead animal skin? Why is it considered impure?
It's rotting flesh. It's got bacteria. It smells terrible.
Exactly. He says the impurity is the process of putrefaction. So if you can stop that process, you've removed the impurity. He says if you chemically treat the hide, tan it, and sterilize it, so there's no bacteria left and it won't rot, then it is pure.
So for him, the ritual status of the animal, whether it was slaughtered in the name of God or not, is a separate issue from the material purity of its hide.
Exactly. The material purity is a matter of chemistry. If the leather is chemically stable and sterile, it's clean, full stop.
This is such a consistent theme. He is relentlessly moving the locus of authority from the religious text to the observable scientific reality. And nowhere is this more controversial and honestly more shocking for the time than when we start talking about the taboo animals.
Oh, the dogs and pigs section.
Ah.
This is where he really pushes the envelope. You can feel him taking a deep breath before he writes these parts.
Let's talk about the pig first. Because in Islam, the pig, the khinzir, is the ultimate line in the sand for many people. It is considered najis alain, inherently impure. Its very essence is filth. You don't touch it. You certainly don't eat it.
Correct. And for most of history, the explanation for this prohibition is simply ta'budi, meaning it's a non-rationalizable act of worship. We obey because God said so. We don't need a reason. Trying to find a reason is seen as questioning God.
But Al-Waily, by his very nature, demands a reason. He can't accept just because.
He always looks for the illet, the effective cause, or the underlying reason behind the law. He refuses to believe God makes arbitrary rules. So he argues that the prohibition on the pig wasn't arbitrary at all. He says God prohibited the pig because, in the ancient world, pigs were objectively filthy. They were scavengers, they ate garbage. And critically, they carried diseases that were transferable to humans. He specifically points out tapeworms and the parasite that causes trichinosis.
Okay, so he reframes the divine ban as a divine public health measure. Don't eat this animal, it will make you sick.
Yes. But then, after establishing that as a premise, he drops the bombshell. He poses a modern hypothetical question. He asks, what if we change the pig?
Change the pig, what does that mean?
He looks at modern veterinary science and industrial farming, even as it existed in the 50s. He asks, if we can raise a pig in a completely hygienic, controlled farm, if we feed it nothing but clean grain, if we give it antibiotics and vaccines, and if a certified veterinarian can examine it and declare that it is 100% free of tapeworms, free of trichinosis, and free of any other filth, does the prohibition still stand?
Whoa. That is a heavy, heavy question. He is implying that the impurity is not in the animal's metaphysical essence, but in its biological state of harm. And if you remove the harm, do you remove the impurity?
That is precisely his implication. Now, to be clear, he doesn't explicitly come out and say, so go ahead and eat bacon. He's too careful for that. But he completely dismantles the logic that says the animal is metaphysically evil. He says it was biologically dangerous. And biology can be engineered.
That is a massive theological shift. He's essentially saying God's law is conditional. Don't do X because of reason Y. If modern technology makes reason Y disappear, then the ruling on X is up for debate.
Exactly. And he applies this same powerful logic to dogs.
The dog, or kalb, also a major point of contention.
The huge issue. The classical view, found in many hadiths, is that dogs are impure, and their saliva is particularly so. There's a famous instruction that if a dog licks a bowl or a vessel, you have to wash it 7 times.
And one of those times, I think it's usually the first or the last, has to be with dust or earth.
Correct. Which, again, to a modern listener sounds completely counterintuitive. Why would you scrub your dinner plate with dirt? That sounds like you're making it dirtier, not cleaner.
But Al-Waily analyzes this. He doesn't just dismiss it.
No, he takes it seriously, and he analyzes it. He asks, why Earth? Why 7 times? He reconstructs the historical context. He notes that in the Prophet's era in Arabia, dogs weren't, pampered golden doodles living in apartments. They were wild or semi-wild scavengers. They ate carrion. They roamed in packs. And crucially, they carried rabies.
So they were a serious vector for disease.
A very serious disease. And Al-Waily argues that the command to wash 7 times, and especially with earth, was a primitive but effective form of sterilization. Earth is an abrasive cleaner. It contains certain minerals with antibacterial properties. In a time before soap, and certainly before bleach, rubbing a pot with earth and rinsing it multiple times was probably the strongest disinfectant method they had available.
So again, it was a practical instruction for a specific context. Use the strongest cleaner you have to kill these dangerous germs.
Exactly. And once he's established that, he makes the clean dog argument. He draws a sharp distinction between a stray, diseased scavenger from 7th century Mecca and a modern, vaccinated, domesticated dog from 20th century Baghdad.
And he brings in the professional again. He talks about the role of the veterinarian here, right?
Right. He does. This is central to his point. He argues that a dog that is kept clean, that is fed proper food, that is medically checked and vaccinated by a vet, does not carry the impurity, meaning the danger of the wild dogs of the past. He asks a pointed question. Why are we scrubbing a bowl 7 times with dirt if the dog has been vaccinated against rabies and is, frankly, probably cleaner than some of the humans using the bowl?
I find this so fascinating because he's basically engaging in a transfer of authority. He is arguing quite explicitly that in matters of hygiene and safety, the veterinarian and the doctor have more authority to define what is najis, what is impure or harmful, than the religious scholar does.
That is the core shift. That is the revelation in his thought. He is saying the scholar knows the text, but the doctor knows the reality. And if the text is fundamentally about protecting reality, like public health and safety, then the doctor's expertise wins. The scholar cannot overrule the microscope.
It's completely utilitarian framework, isn't it? It's all about what works, what prevents harm, and what promotes well-being.
It is. And that leads us directly into the broader philosophical underpinning of his entire project, which is his focus on the philosophy of public interest, or maslaha.
Maslaha. Let's define that term properly for our listeners.
Maslaha is a well-established principle in Islamic legal theory. It translates roughly as public interest, common good, or general welfare. The idea is that a core purpose of Islamic law is to protect and promote the well-being of the community.
So it's not a new idea he invented.
Not at all. It's an old tool. But what Al-Waily does is take this tool and put it on steroids. He elevates it from one principle among many to the supreme principle that governs everything else.
So he's not just nitpicking specific rules about pigs and water at this point. He has a grand unifying theory.
He does. He believes that the ultimate purpose of the Sharia, all of Islamic law, is the happiness and welfare of human beings, both in this world and in the next.
Happiness. That's not a word you hear often in these strict old legal discussions. Usually it's about duty, submission, avoiding hellfire, obedience.
For Al-Waily, utility is divine law. He argues that since God is fundamentally merciful and just, it is impossible that God would legislate something that causes net harm to humanity. Therefore, if a traditional religious ruling is causing harm, hardship, or goes directly against the public interest, it cannot be a correct interpretation of God's will, even if it's written down in the books for centuries.
He's very critical of those who cling to the outer meanings, the zahir of the texts, at the expense of human welfare.
Extremely critical. He says if adhering to a literal reading of a text makes life miserable or dangerous for people, then you are misreading the text. You have mistaken the vessel for the content.
And he gives a really famous and frankly very powerful historical example to back this up, doesn't he? He doesn't just pull this out of thin air, he goes right to the top, to the story of the Caliph Umar.
This is his trump card. It's the historical precedent that makes his argument so potent, because you can't argue with Al-Waily's modernism without first arguing with Umar bin al-Kaba, the second caliph, one of the most revered and authoritative figures in all of Sunni Islam.
Okay, set the scene for us. What did Umar do that was so radical?
Okay, so in the Quran, in Surah Al-Tawbah, there is a verse that explicitly details who is eligible to receive zakat, or mandatory charity. One of the 8 categories listed is al-mu'alafa kulubuhum, which translates to those whose hearts are to be reconciled.
And in practice, what did that mean at the time of the Prophet?
It effectively meant paying certain non-Muslim tribal leaders or recent wavering converts to become or remain loyal to the nascent Muslim state. It was a strategic payout. You could call it a state-sanctioned bribe for peace and political stability.
And the Prophet Muhammad himself practiced this. It's in the Quran. It's clear, unambiguous law.
Undeniable. But then years later, Umar becomes caliph. And the situation has changed dramatically.
How so?
The Muslim state is no longer a fragile community in Medina. It's an empire. It has powerful armies, a functioning treasury. It's a regional superpower. And some of these tribal leaders come to Umar expecting their annual payout. They hold out their hands and say, "Where is our money? We are the ones whose hearts need reconciling," as the Quran says.
And what was Umar's response?
He cut them off. He said, "No, the payments are over."
It's in the Quran. How can he just say no?
That's what they said. They were shocked. They said, "Did the Quran change? Is this a new revelation?" And Umar's reply is the key to Al-Waili's entire argument. Umar said, "No, the Quran hasn't changed. But the reason for the law has changed."
The ilat.
The ilat, exactly. Umar argued that the Prophet gave this money because Islam was weak and needed to buy friends. I'm paraphrasing now, "Islam is strong. We don't need to buy your loyalty. God has strengthened his religion. If you want to believe, believe. If not, the sword is between us."
That is a massive political flex. But legally, it's profound.
It is the ultimate legal precedent for what Al-Waily is trying to do. Umar, the great caliph, suspended a direct Quranic instruction because the context that underpinned it had changed. The ilat, for the law, the weakness of the state had disappeared, so the ruling itself became obsolete.
So Al-Waily takes this story and uses it like a battering ram against the traditionalists of his own time.
Precisely. He attacks the scholars who blindly follow the letter of the text without understanding its spirit or its context. He's saying, if the great Caliph Umar could suspend a Quranic financial instruction because the political context changed, then why on earth can't we reevaluate a ruling about water or dogs when the entire scientific context of the universe has changed?
It's a very powerful argument. It grounds his modernism in deep, unimpeachable Islamic history. He's not being a westernizer or a liberal. He's claiming to be a true follower of the methodology of Umar.
Exactly. He's trying to reclaim the dynamic spirit of the tradition from the scholars he saw as stagnant.
But obviously, this kind of thinking didn't make him popular with the religious establishment of his day, and that brings us to his critique of those leaders. And honestly, reading this part, he sounds pretty angry.
He is scathing. He pulls no punches whatsoever. He uses terms like merchants of religion.
Merchants of religion, that's a heavy charge. It implies they are selling something that should be free.
He argues they are selling stagnation for profit. He is incredibly harsh on what he calls wearers of the turban, who, in his view, use religion for personal power, social status, or financial gain. And he has this one metaphor that is just devastatingly modern. He compares them to tape recorders.
Tape recorders.
Yes, this is the 1950s, remember. He accuses the rigid traditionalists of being like machines that just repeat ancient words. You record, you play it back, you record, you play it back, without ever processing those words through a modern critical thinking brain. He says they're keeping the masses ignorant and dependent on them in order to maintain their own control.
And he diagnoses them with a specific phobia, doesn't he? A fear of science.
That's a great psychological insight he has. He suggests that these scholars are secretly afraid of opening the door of ijtihad because it would immediately expose their own lack of knowledge about the modern world.
So it's about protecting their status.
Think about it. If the rule of the game is, we must follow the ancient book exactly as written, then the scholar who has memorized the most ancient books is the king. He has all the authority. But if the rule of the game becomes, we must follow science and reason to understand the book's true purpose, then suddenly that same sheikh needs to understand biology. He needs to understand chemistry. He needs to understand physics.
And if he doesn't, he loses his authority to the doctor, the engineer, the scientist.
That is Al-Waili's accusation. He says they keep the door to new interpretations closed to protect their own jobs. He claims they prefer to debate ancient, convoluted, hypothetical scenarios. What if a camel falls in a well on a Tuesday? Rather than address the realities of the atom and the microscope, because frankly, they don't understand the atom.
It's a turf war for intellectual authority, and Al-Waily is telling them they're losing ground to the scientists. But interestingly, while Magnia, the author of the original book, was so focused on intra-Muslim unity—
Sunni and Shia getting along.
Right. Al-Waily seems to be aiming for something much bigger, much broader.
Yes, this is a subtle but important point. Al-Waily hints at a broader humanism that transcends sectarian lines entirely. While Magniah is saying, Sunnis and Shias, let's work together, Al-Waily speaks of the human being and reason as universal values. He's not just trying to save his sect, he's trying to save the relevance of faith itself for the entire human species in the modern scientific age.
He sees a potential future where religion and science aren't enemies, but partners in human progress.
A partnership where reason, informed by science, leads the way in interpreting the goals of revelation.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's try to synthesize what we found in this incredible book, in this commentary, Al-Taaqib.
It's truly a snapshot of a particular moment in time. It's mid-20th century Islamic modernism in its most raw and passionate form. It represents a desperate, brilliant attempt to reconcile a deep faith with the overwhelming force of scientific advancement.
And the core legacy, the biggest shift he introduces, seems to be a redefinition of purity, or tahara.
Without a doubt, he moved it from being a primarily ritual state, something mystical, determined by volume and incantations, to being a primarily hygienic, scientific state.
He viewed the old religious code as essentially a primitive public health manual, an excellent one for the 7th century, but one that desperately needed a software update for the 20th.
That's a perfect summary of his project.
But this leaves us with a really provocative thought, doesn't it? And I want to leave the listener with this. Al-Waily argued, very persuasively, that if a religious ruling contradicts science or reason, it must be reinterpreted. It sounds great on paper. It's logical. It's rational.
It does. It sounds like the perfect solution. But it immediately raises the question, who gets to define reason? Who gets to define public interest? And more importantly, science changes.
Right. What was considered solid science in the 1950s might be seen as archaic or even harmful today. We used to think lobotomies were good science. We used to think asbestos was a miracle material.
Exactly. So if religious law becomes entirely subservient to the current scientific consensus, does it cease to be a stable religious law and just become a reflection of whatever's in the latest issue of Nature magazine?
If the veterinarian's diagnosis can overrule a 1,400-year-old legal tradition about dogs, is it still Islam you're practicing? Or is it just the Department of Health with a spiritual gloss?
That is the danger or the challenge that Al-Waily's project courts.
Yeah.
Is he saving the religion by making it modern and relevant? Or is he secularizing it from the inside out, slowly replacing every pillar of faith with a pillar of science until there's nothing uniquely religious left but a list of hygiene tips and ethical advice?
That is the incredibly fine line between modernizing a tradition and dismantling it. And Al-Waily's commentary, Al-Taaqib, walks right on that razor's edge for hundreds of pages.
It absolutely does, and that is why it is such a critical and still controversial text to understand. It forces us to ask that fundamental question. What is the core of faith? Is it the specific rules handed down through history? Or is it the timeless values and goals that those rules were trying to achieve?
A question without any easy answer. Well, that's all the time we have for this deep dive. Whether you're a tape recorder or a free thinker, we hope this sparks some reason in your day. Thanks for listening.